The 18th century began to turn the tides of many social customs to include scientific and mathematical advancements, which had drastic impacts on medicine, astrology, engineering, and philosophy, to name a few. In turn, the people of the era began to lean heavily on reason and tangible facts to support beliefs and settle disputes on new and customary social standards. More than just an era of scientific breakthroughs, the 18th century introduced the Age of Reason, commonly termed as the Enlightenment Age. This wasn't merely a superficial shift. It marked a profound change in the collective consciousness. People began to veer away from age-old beliefs and blind traditions. Instead, they sought tangible evidence, embraced logic, and thrived on reasoned arguments to understand the world around them and navigate societal norms. Imagine an era where every long-standing institution, every deeply entrenched belief was subjected to the lens of scrutiny and questioned. This wave of questioning spared none. The omnipotent church found itself under the microscope. Established gender roles that had been static for centuries were challenged. Ingrained social customs faced introspection, and the institution of marriage, which for a long time had been held inviolable, found itself amidst heated debates. Now, while this period was defined by several thought leaders today, I'd like to focus on a niche yet pivotal aspect of it all. Hi, I'm Marcy Duncan, and in the next 8 minutes or so, we'll traverse through the lives and contributions of 3 women from this era. These were women of courage whose literary endeavors shone a spotlight on the oft-ignored predicaments of married women of their time. Through their writings and advocacy, they didn't just highlight issues, they laid the groundwork for seismic shifts in marital dynamics that have since then impacted countless generations. Join me on this journey as we delve into the lives of Mary Lepore, Mary Estelle, and Frances Burney, exploring their narratives, understanding their struggles, and celebrating their lasting legacies. Mary Lepore was a remarkable figure in 18th century literature, and her work provides valuable insights into the challenges and injustices women faced and contains treasured accounts detailing how women felt during her time, which influenced change for women in the generations that preceded her. She wrote the poem An Essay on Women, addressing issues such as the limited opportunities for women, the emphasis on physical appearance, the societal expectations placed on women, and the unequal treatment of women in marriage. Lepore uses her voice to question and expose injustice. In her short 24-year lifespan, she used reason and satire as literary tools to incite change. In her time, all women, like Eve, were blamed for inherent follies, but could not make their own decisions. She expresses in lines 59 through 60 of her poem, "Yet, with 10,000 follies in her charge, unhappy woman's but a slave at large." She saw marriage as a market where men appraised women and absorbed their identities, akin to a slave. Marriage was a transaction during her era. She wrote about women's unhappiness due to social injustices, rather than flaws within women themselves. Moving on to Mary Estelle, I thought it would be fun to add some external opinions. I have compiled some opinions for the discussion from Teresa Bajan, Associate Professor of Political Theory at Oriel College University of Oxford. Mary Estelle, often hailed as the pioneering figure of English feminism, boldly challenged the status quo of her era with her famous assertion, "If all men are born free, why are all women born slaves?" In the face of mockery and opposition during her time, she advocated for the woman's right to choose marriage rather than being compelled into it as a vocation. Estelle passionately argued that a woman's intellect was no different from that of a man's, emphasizing the crucial need for women to receive education.
So she publishes her really famous critique of marriage initially in 1700 in a pamphlet called Some Reflections Upon Marriage, and today it's by far her best known work. It's the most taught work, certainly. But it's very important to be clear that when Estelle is critiquing marriage, she's not objecting to the institution of patriarchal marriage itself. She's very clear that she sees that there's a divine foundation and indeed a scriptural foundation for the idea that in a marriage the husband is the head of the wife. And so wives do, she thinks, owe their husbands duties of absolute, if also rational, obedience. But the issue she identifies, it's what distinguishes marriage from the other hierarchical institutions to which Estelle is firmly committed, is the idea that women are meant to enter into marriage freely, as equals, right? They must consent to the marriage contract. But how free can that consent really be if there are simply no other options for women in English society? And more particularly, if women have been denied the education that they need in order to be able to develop their reason so as to be able to rationally evaluate the proposals that are made them. So a big theme of Reflections on Marriage is the prevalence of unequal marriages in Estelle's view. Marriages where wives excel their husbands not only intellectually but also ethically, where husbands take advantage of women in effect as fortune seekers, and the fact that women have basically been abandoned by society as prey to these predatory men. But there's also a deeper point, and I think it's one that we're going to come back to and pervades all her writing, is the idea that something has gone very deeply wrong in a society where marriage is seen as the be-all and end-all for half of humankind. So women are raised to think that marriage is the purpose for which they're made, which in effect teaches them to think of themselves as being made to be servants to men.
Very insightful words from Teresa Bajan. I'm certain you agree. Finally, we'll move to Frances Burney. Frances Burney, or Fanny, was best known in her own time as the author of Evelina and other novels. Her modern reputation, however, rests primarily on her extensive journals and letters. She gives first-hand descriptions of many of the important figures of the time. It shows her development as an artist and contains typical vivid sketches of her family, her friends, and acquaintances in London and throughout the country. Some of her volumes will carry through the period of her greatest fame, as mentioned previously, Evelina in 1778 and Cecilia in 1782, and her exit from the court of King George III. It also contains, and very significantly, her undergoing a mastectomy, which is delivered in great detail. Her novels often delved into issues of social class and gender in the 18th century English society. Her work provided a peek into the lives of women and the constraints they faced, making her an early contributor to feminist literature. Burney's novels particularly Evelina, helped popularize the novel and the narrative technique in the 18th century and influenced later authors to adopt similar styles. Fanny Burney's personal journals and letters are highly valued because of their detailed accounts of daily life, social interactions, and her own experiences. They serve as a valuable historical and literary record of the late 18th century and provide insights into the lives of women of her time. Marriage in the 18th century was unjust but changing for women, as depicted by Burney, Leopold, and Estelle, who rebelled against societal norms of blind obedience and silence. Their call for agency, identity, and power gave voice to an age of women's liberation and freedom. Working anonymously at times, they suffered oppression but found clever ways to express their concerns using reason, giving women's plight a voice. My name is Marcy Duncan, and I thank you for listening.